I'm looking back at the questions that
Here's one that was early on as well. In what way do you think Jesus was forsaken at his crucifixion and death?
Okay. This is from my purple belt brother, Daniel. That's a great question. There have been whole volumes written on the Cry of Dereliction. In fact, my dad's one of his final papers when he was in seminary, he had to write on the Cry of Dereliction, the Jesus's cry from the cross. I take a multi-level view of it. And what I mean is when Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? I don't think he was primarily making a theological, philosophical statement. I think he was screaming out Psalm 22. Like, I think that's the equivalent, is the audience would have heard, or the people watching who knew scripture would have heard the opening lines of Psalm 22. And I think he was crying that out because he was living. If you read through Psalm 22, we have a sermon on the podcast where I actually talk about what was Jesus thinking on the cross. And it's a look at Psalm 22. I think he was invoking that psalm as the Son of David par excellence, who was experiencing to the fullest what David had only prophetically and poetically wrote about in that psalm. And when you go back and read that psalm, read it in its context of what David would have experienced, and it's metaphorical, like his hands and feet being pierced, or like lions around him, or dividing his garment, things like that. It's metaphor, like it's hyperbolic. David was using artistic imagery, but then when you look at Jesus, he was actually literally experiencing a lot of that stuff. And it takes on a whole new meaning, which is what Matthew has been trying to show throughout his gospel, Jesus reliving and recapitulating Israel's experience in himself. So was the Father and the Son, like, was there a rending of the Trinity on the cross? I hesitate to go that far. I don't know. I don't rule that out. It could be possible that something metaphysically was going on that I'm sure something was going on that we'll never know the fullness of. But personally, when I hear, my God, why have you forsaken me? I hear the title of Psalm 22 first and foremost. So reading Psalm 22, I think, gives us a better idea of what was going on the cross than kind of later metaphysical reasoning about the Trinity being rent asunder and all that kind of stuff. It's not a very committal answer, but I think when you get into that realm of theology, you have to be okay with holding things with loose hands and just, speaking where scripture speaks and being silent where scripture's silent. It's what I try to do to the best of my abilities.
But that is so antithetical to our culture. Our culture, you got to pick a side.
And it makes for bad YouTube click rating too. Like, it'd be much better for the algorithm if I came out with hot takes and just, released dogmatic declaration.
I really appreciated how you pulled in, I think you said it was Psalms 22. Because I see that theme recurring in Bible study a lot. You see Paul doing it. Jesus does it constantly. Even in the Old Testament, you see the authors refer back to a scripture by referencing the first part of the scripture. They didn't have verses, and they couldn't say turn to page 246 or chapter 3, verse 7. So they'd say the first phrase at the top of the psalm, which then drew the whole audience to, hey, let me go and see what the rest of that psalm spoke about, because that's the context that Jesus is talking about.
Yeah, it's like if I were to say we're not in Kansas anymore, you would immediately understand I'm talking about, I'm alluding to the Wizard of Oz, and then you would draw a comparison, like what might I be trying to say by making that allusion? I think it's very similar to what the New Testament authors do with the Old Testament.